Hello folks, Russ Scala here. Today we're going to talk about the people that are first through the door. When you call 911 and those policemen, firemen, and paramedics arrive, and I don't want to leave out the war veterans because they're also first through the door. We're going to talk about new treatment protocols, what they can do to protect themselves, what really happens and what goes on inside their head. Okay, with my history of being a paramedic attached to the SWAT team, I made a lot of mistakes early on with drinking too much and eating bad food, and I wanted to save lives, but I really didn't know what all that emergency training and all that emergency response was doing to my system. It's not too late. I'm going to be okay. Today I have Bruce Robinson with me. He's been a police officer for 25 years. We actually work the streets together, helping people. And we're going to talk about this evolution on what police officers can do to protect themselves, what physicians aren't doing. I mean, when a police officer gets in a problem, he sees a physician, the physician doesn't really have the training to understand physiologically what's going on in the body of emergency workers. There's still a lot of collateral damage with the pulse shootings. There's police officers that have not returned to work yet. So we're going to look at this at 60,000 feet and then drill down actually on a cellular level on what's going on physiologically and what could be done if you know somebody that's a police officer, fireman, a paramedic, or a war veteran. Everything we're talking about here, folks, is new. We've got neurologists, we've got research labs and pharmacies helping us develop these new treatment protocols. So, Bruce, thanks for coming, man.
Thanks for having me.
Good, good. Walk us through your history.
Well, I've been with a local law enforcement agency for 25 years. I spent 10 years of that in the K-9 division and almost 17 years of it on the SWAT team.
Wow.
Now I'm in the office for the most part, very busy still, but wouldn't change it for the world.
That's good, man. That's good. You're one of the guys that are healthy, and this is back. I was put on the critical incident stress debriefing team in the 80s. We had a police officer and a good friend of mine commit suicide at the city, and I knew back then talk therapy and antidepressants weren't going to work. So what did you do to? I mean, you're in the streets. What did you do differently to keep yourself healthy? Because obesity is a big problem, and obviously you've done really well.
Yeah, and one of my ambitions when I first got on the department was to join the SWAT team. So health was always important to me because I needed to, first of all, get in shape and then maintain my shape or maintain my physical fitness level so I could do well on a team. Every cop that's out there is involved in some sort of stress every day in some way, shape, or form. So they need to fall back onto something to help them relieve that stress. And for me, it was running and working out.
Yeah, that's real important because for me, before I got into running and triathlons, I was drinking all the time because obviously I was young. I was I think 19 years old, 20 when I started, and I was responding to these emergency calls. And of course, I'm not going to tell anybody how I feel. And then the community I was with, the guys that I was hanging out with at the time, weren't really healthy. So I was just going along with the community, drinking, and I didn't understand the toll it was going to take on my body. And at 20, I thought I was bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
And now I learned a lot. So you had a positive behavior going through that.
Yeah, and a lot of other people did as well. It's just, what activity do you choose to do to help you relieve the stress of everyday life on the street? Just for me, it was working out and running. For other people, it may have been, hiking in the hills or driving to the beach or spending the weekend on the beach. But for me, particularly, I was always into the physical fitness aspect of it.
Yeah, and now we know that when you run and you work out, you increase brain-derived neurotropic factor. Obesity and eating simple carbohydrates, folks, a lot of cops fire, and even myself at the time, when you are hyper alert all that time and you're constantly vigilant, the physiology of a police officer, like when I was a paramedic, I was helping people, but when I was on the SWAT team, I had to change my whole behavior. And that was stressful. I had to, look at people differently. I had to think about, loading my weapons. We had 6 hours we carried and MP5s with a laser scope. And just being on all the time, of course, I thought, I didn't think anything was happening to me, but a lot was happening to me. Even when I was responding to emergency calls, I remember my hands started to shake on emergency scenes. And as soon as I was off work, I would, start drinking, or I would eat the carbohydrates to elevate serotonin levels in my brain. I was medicating myself with alcohol and simple carbs. Didn't know it at the time, but You know the stress. You cycle those thoughts in your head after a shift. You can't shut your brain off.
Yeah, and you go through a whole different range of emotions on any given day, and you need that at the end of the day to do something because your body does react in ways that, until it happens to you the first time, you're not sure what's going to happen. It's like if you walk up to your first ever car during a traffic stop, or in your SWAT team, you make your first ever entry into the building based on what position you are in the stack or if you're on a perimeter. You never know how you're going to react that first time, and after you do that, you kind of make adjustments to yourself and your routine so that you're used to it.
No,
It
and
becomes common.
that's a good point. A regular citizen doesn't understand. Like when I went through the police academy, I was obviously a paramedic at the time, and I had to change my skill set. I went through the police academy, and we were practicing traffic stops. Well, you have all these scenarios in your head about everything bad that happens at a traffic stop. Now, a regular citizen that gets pulled over for a ticket, they have no idea when that cop's walking up, he has these screens dropping in his head. His heart rate's probably 160. He's shit scared. He doesn't know whether you're going to draw down on him, but people think, well, you wonder why these accidents happen where they draw their gun or something happens because when that officer walks up to the car, I mean, there's a lot going on in his head, and a citizen's thinking like, oh, he just pulled me over for a broken taillight. That doesn't happen. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, as the saying goes, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. The people that get pulled over, they think, a lot of times, this is an officer come up, he's a robot, he's going to do his thing, and we're going to be done. But what they don't realize is, especially when you first get in the field and you start making your first couple traffic stops, nobody realizes, and you're kind of shocked at how nervous you are when you first make that approach to the vehicle. You don't know who's in there. You don't know if they've just done something bad or are en route to do something bad. So that's always in their mind, and if people just understood, now when you're more experienced into the field and you've been in those positions more and more often, you're able to condition your body to look for certain things and adjust to different situations. But when you're new and you're thrust into that position, it's something totally unexpected.
Yeah, you're dropping screens in your head. Well, I didn't have
Exactly.
I didn't have the screens in my head from being a police officer. This was all new to me, so it was tough for me to change my mindset, I remember. But I remember just even being a paramedic when I was first out of school, I responded to a vehicle versus the tree. And I responded to the vehicle versus the tree, and there's a guy in there, and he was bleeding, he had a broken arm, and I'm doing everything right.
Hmm.
I'm doing everything by the book. Well, the
Right.
guy was shot twice in the chest. And it didn't find out until we got to the emergency room. So the doctor says, who brought this man in? I'm like real proud, raised my hand. He goes, he's shot. And I'm like, I just wanted to hide.
Yeah.
My point is that when I got caught up in that scene, I'm looking at the car against the tree. I didn't think shooting. But after that happened to me, my God, I took clothes off everybody because I know that, I had tunnel vision.
Yeah.
So how do you get that experience? They're not going to teach you that in school. It only comes from being on the job. And my point is that experience that we have to go through with all the years, that damages our physiology over time. Now it happens to a war vet faster,
Hmm.
but over like 10 or 15 years, what you and I've been through, if something happens to us and we go to a regular doctor, forget about it. He's not going to know how to treat us. And that's sort of what we're doing here. We want to educate people, shine light on different areas because the physiology of a police officer, a SWAT team person is no different than an athlete. They have to be taken care of differently. You can't just throw. I'm not downing antidepressants. I think antidepressants are a great bridge, but physiologically, the metabolism of an emergency worker, police, fire, paramedic, war veteran, their physiology is breaking down, and that's not being looked at, and that's what we're looking at and talking about today. The reaction and the recovery. What we're trying to do here is shine a light on what happens to the emergency worker's body physiologically. Now we know the Pulse shooting was not too long ago in Orlando, and we know that there's police officers that have not come back to work yet.
Right.
This really strikes a chord with me because I know they're not looking at these police officers physiologically. They're using the basic standard of care, talk therapy, maybe antidepressants, and that right there is just treating the symptom, and we're not looking at them physiologically, which we have the testing. We could do that now. You know that.
Right.
So how do you think we get around that?
One of the things that officers and first responders have accessible to them now is something called the EAP, or the Employee Assistance Program. It takes a lot of professionals and puts them together to make them available to first responders for whatever type of help they need, to include financial assistance, medical assistance, psychological assistance. And that's all well and good, but the thing with first responders for the most part is they want to take on this persona of, I'm hardcore, I'm Mr. Tough Guy, I can handle just about anything.
Right, right.
Well, you can for a little while, but you can't do that on a consistent basis, and you can't keep that up. So at some point, it's incumbent upon the officer or the first responder to say, hey, this is affecting me, whether they get those clues from their own mind or their spouse or significant other says, hey, you've changed, and you should do something about it. We need to go talk to somebody. So that's always available there. But one of the things that really got me excited was last night on the news, there was a female, a wife of an officer whose husband was involved in a pulse shooting, and he hasn't returned to work yet because of PTSD. And that's common in those type of situations, whether or not they realize it or not, it is common. But what she's done is she's introduced legislation to make it so that the officers who need that type of assistance get the same type of assistance as if they were injured on duty. Let's take, for instance, say I'm on duty, I break my leg during the course of my workday. I'm paid, all my medical expenses are paid, and everything's taken care of. But for those officers that were involved in traumatic situations like that, that's not always the case. But the legislation that she introduced will enable that and make it so that officers that are into that type of situation receive the same type of care as if they were on duty and had broken a leg.
I like that. And also, folks, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to educate, PTSD could happen to a mother that's been abused or a mother that has lost a child. It's not just emergency workers. So everybody out there, listen to this. What Bruce just said is really important. I believe PTSD is a label, but it's a needed label. But I also want to believe, I don't want people to think that PTSD is going to be solved with one drug, one antidepressant. That isn't how the body works. We know that the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis is suppressed when you're in a stressful situation. There's something called a flashbulb image. If you want to remember a phone number, you got to say it a few times. It goes to your hippocampus, and then you lock it in long-term storage. When you're on a traumatic situation and you see something, you actually lock this into your long-term storage forever, and that's very, very hard for people to get their head around. So physiologically, when you're producing excess cortisol, when you're like Bruce or myself, we were on a traumatic scene, and at night I'm running all the scenarios in my head, I can't shut my head off at night. This is where the multifactorial approach, you have to look at the physiology. The intestinal tract is the second brain. We need to look at the intestinal tract. We need to look at the adrenal glands. We need to look at testosterone levels. When I talk about testosterone levels, I'm not talking about libido here or muscle. I'm talking about testosterone is a natural antidepressant that's suppressed by the stress hormone cortisol. You don't have to read the book by Dr. Sapolsky called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers to understand that psychoneuroimmunology means that cortisol suppresses every hormone in your body. Now, these police officers and firefighters and emergency workers may go to a doctor and they may get put on a statin drug. Well, they don't need a statin drug because that one drug that lowers cholesterol, you need cholesterol to make every beneficial hormone in your body. So by Bruce and I having this dialogue here, hopefully it'll paint a picture. When you have a family member or a friend that's going through PTSD, a traumatic situation, you'll understand that, maybe that Prozac, Paxil, or Zoloft, they could be on that for a little time, but we need to look at other parts of the body,
Yeah.